still remember the exact smell of that night, the faint cologne I had sprayed before leaving work mixed with the musty, almost sour scent of old takeout boxes I'd forgotten to throw out in the back seat of my car. It was late September of 2019, just before the world turned upside down with the pandemic. And the air in Baltimore had that early fall chill that reminded you Halloween was around the corner. That was the night when a single, stupid detail, one flimsy piece of paper, buried in my wife's purse, changed everything I thought I knew about my marriage, about my life, about who I was. It wasn't a dramatic discovery in the way movies like to show it. There wasn't a lipstick stain on a collar or a text flashing across a phone screen. It was quieter, messier, and it crept into my chest like smoke filling a room until you're choking before you even realize the fire started. But let me back up a little. My name is David Miller. I was 36 then, born in 1983, the same year Return of the Jedi hit theaters. I grew up in a working-class family in Towson, just outside Baltimore, and if you asked anyone who knew me, they'd probably say I was the dependable one. Not brilliant, not flashy, just dependable. I worked as a project manager for a mid-sized construction firm. I liked my routine: coffee in the morning, NPR playing on my commute, podcasts about history or true crime on the treadmill after work. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. I met my wife, Rachel. In 2011, she was fresh out of nursing school, working at Johns Hopkins, and she had this laugh that could fill a room. We met through mutual friends at a 4th of July cookout. I can still picture her in that red sundress with tiny white flowers, barefoot in the grass while fireworks cracked over the inner harbor later that night. By the end of summer, I knew she was the one. We married in 2014, a small ceremony in Annapolis, with crab cakes instead of the traditional chicken or steak. Everyone said we looked like the perfect couple, her with her soft brown curls and bright hazel eyes, me with my steady grin and square shoulders that always seemed to be carrying someone else's load. For years, I thought we had it good. We bought a modest townhouse in Federal Hill in 2016, close enough to walk to Camden Yards. I still remember taking her to opening day in 2018. The Orioles getting crushed as usual, but we laughed the whole time, eating hot dogs and overpriced peanuts. We'd sit on the roof deck at night, sipping cheap wine, and talk about maybe starting a family someday. She'd joke that our kids would inherit my dad's humor and her terrible singing voice. But looking back, the cracks had been there. Hairline fractures you don't notice until the whole structure starts to shift. Rachel's job as a nurse had always been demanding, but around 2018, she started working more nights, more double shifts. At first, I didn't think much of it. Healthcare is brutal, and the pay was decent with the overtime. But gradually, I noticed she came home later and later, sometimes with excuses that felt thin. We were short-staffed again, she'd sigh, tossing her scrubs into the hamper. Had to stay late. I wanted to believe her. I did believe her, but there were little things that gnawed at me, like how she started guarding her phone, face down on the table, or how she suddenly cared a lot more about her appearance. New lingerie tucked into the drawer, perfume I hadn't smelled on her before. I told myself it was just her way of boosting confidence. God knows nursing is a tough job. Maybe she just needed to feel good about herself. There was one night in March 2019 that still echoes in my head. She was working late, and I decided to surprise her with takeout from that Thai place she loved in Fells Point. I drove over to the hospital only to find out her shift had ended 2 hours earlier. When she finally came home, she looked startled to see me with food waiting. She laughed it off, said she'd stopped for drinks with coworkers to blow off steam. I wanted to believe her, so I swallowed the unease and pretended it didn't bother me. But that night, lying next to her in bed, I couldn't shake the faint whiff of cologne that wasn't mine clinging to her hair. By September, I had convinced myself I was just being paranoid, some insecure husband who read too many Reddit threads about infidelity. I didn't want to be that guy, the one who snoops, the one who doesn't trust. My dad always said trust is the foundation of marriage, and I clung to that like a lifeline. And then came the night of the hotel bill. It was a Friday evening. It's the 27th of September. I'd come home early, around 6, and Rachel wasn't back yet. She had texted that she'd be late again. Another crazy shift. I figured I'd do the laundry, one of those chores I didn't mind. She'd left her purse on the kitchen counter, And when I picked it up to move it off the pile of clean clothes, the contents spilled out. Receipts, gum wrappers, a half-empty bottle of Advil, and then folded slip of paper with a Marriott logo peeking out. I almost didn't pick it up. God, how I wish I hadn't. It was a bill from the Inner Harbor Marriott, dated 2 nights earlier. A single king bed. 2 drinks charged to the room. My name wasn't on it. Of course it was hers. Rachel Miller. I stood there, frozen, staring at the bill like maybe I'd misread it, like maybe it was a mistake. But the date was clear as day. 2 nights earlier, the same night she'd told me she was stuck covering a double shift at the hospital. My hands shook so badly. I had to put the paper down. My ears rang, and I could hear my own pulse thudding in my skull. It felt like the floor had opened beneath me. Like the entire scaffolding of my life had just collapsed. I didn't confront her that night. I couldn't. When she finally walked in around midnight, smiling warily and kissing me on the cheek, I just stood there, hollow, clutching the knowledge like a burning coal in my chest. She asked me why I was up so late, and I mumbled something about work emails. She went upstairs, showered, and slipped into bed like nothing was wrong. I lay awake beside her, the sound of her breathing steady and calm, while I stared at the ceiling, wondering how long I'd been living a lie. It's strange the way betrayal creeps into your bones. It's not just the show kits, the 1,000 tiny flashbacks that start to rearrange themselves in your head, each memory twisting into something sinister. The late-night texts, the unexplained absences, the smell of cologne, the guarded phone. They all lined up like dominoes, and now they were falling, one by one. I thought about our wedding day, the vows we'd written ourselves. Rachel had said she'd never lie to me, never break the trust we built. I remembered the way her hand trembled as she slid the ring onto my finger. The way she whispered, "It's always you, David." But it wasn't always me. I didn't sleep at all that night. I got up before dawn, made coffee I couldn't drink, and sat at the kitchen table staring at that hotel bill. It was just a piece of paper, but it was the heaviest thing I'd ever held. And the worst part? A small, broken voice inside me kept whispering, "Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's innocent. Maybe you're overreacting," but deep down, I already knew the truth. That was the night everything changed. The weekend after I found the hotel bill was one of the longest stretches of time I've ever endured. Every second felt sharp, jagged, like I was walking barefoot across broken glass. I carried the bill folded in my pocket the entire time, like a toxic secret burning against my thigh, unsure whether to confront Rachel or pretend I hadn't seen it. On Saturday morning, she hummed in the kitchen as she made pancakes, like nothing was wrong. The smell of butter and syrup should have been comforting, but all I could taste was bitterness. Every time she smiled at me, every casual brush of her hand across my arm, I wondered if that same hand had touched someone else just days before. I felt sick, but I forced the food down anyway because I didn't want her to ask questions. That entire weekend, I lived in this surreal double life. Outwardly, I was still the dependable husband, laughing at a rerun of The Office on Netflix, listening as she complained about hospital politics. Inside, I was drowning. I replayed the moment I found the bill again and again. The Marriott logo, the 2 drinks, the king bed, the date. It wasn't just a receipt, it was evidence. Evidence that the woman I loved had been living another life behind my back. By Sunday night, I knew I couldn't just let it go. The thought of sliding into another week, pretending, smiling, going to work as if everything was normal, it felt impossible. But I also knew I couldn't just throw the bill at her and demand answers. Rachel was smart. She'd spin it. She'd gaslight me. Maybe she'd even flip it back on me, accuse me of being paranoid, insecure. And I wasn't sure I was ready for her to look me in the eye and lie to me outright, so I waited Monday morning. I called in sick. My boss, Tom, was understanding. He'd always been the kind of guy who cared more about deadlines than butts in seats, and I had enough goodwill banked up to take a day. But I didn't spend it resting. I spent it driving. I parked my car across from the Inner Harbor Marriott, staring at the revolving glass doors like they were the gates to some forbidden world. People in business suits streamed in and out, dragging roller bags behind them, laughing into phones. I must have sat there for 2 hours, sweating into the upholstery, trying to work up the nerve to go inside. When I finally did, my hands trembled as I walked up to the front desk. I told the clerk my wife had misplaced a copy of her bill, that I needed one for insurance reimbursement. My voice cracked slightly, but the clerk didn't question it. She clicked a few keys, printed out a fresh copy, and slid it across the counter. There it was again. Same date, same charges. Same room, my wife's name, only this time there was one more detail I hadn't seen on the crumpled copy in her purse. The reservation hadn't been booked by Rachel. It had been booked under another name. A man's name, Christopher Hughes. I didn't know any Christopher Hughes. At least, not then. But his name was seared into my brain the entire drive home. I must have whispered it 100 times under my breath, like repeating it would make him more real. Christopher Hughes. Who the hell was he? That night, Rachel came home later than usual. She smelled faintly of lavender soap, freshly showered, and I wondered if she'd stop somewhere before coming back. She kissed me on the forehead like always, dropped her bag by the stairs, and asked if I wanted to watch Stranger Things. I couldn't do it. Not anymore. I told her I was exhausted and went to bed early. But I didn't sleep. I lay there in the dark, listening to her brush her teeth, climb into bed, scroll through her phone before turning out the light. I lay rigid, my back to her. My heart hammering so loud I thought she might hear it. At some point I realized I couldn't keep living in this limbo. I had to know. I had to see it with my own eyes. Over the next week, I turned into someone I barely recognized. I started leaving work early, making excuses about site visits, just so I could drive around the city like a detective in some low-budget noir film. I followed Rachel twice. Once to the hospital, she really did have a shift that night. But the second time, on a Thursday, she left work around 6, even though she'd told me she was covering until midnight. I trailed her from a distance, pulse racing, terrified she'd spot me. She drove downtown, parked near Pratt Street, and then, like some horrible confirmation of everything I feared, she walked straight into the Marriott. The same Marriott. I didn't follow her inside. I couldn't. I sat in my car across the street, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles ached, watching the revolving door swallow her whole. 15 minutes later, a man walked in too. Mid-40s, tall, salt-tanned pepper hair, crisp navy suit. Even from across the street, I could tell he carried himself with the kind of confidence that came from money and power. I didn't know for certain it was Christopher Hughes, but my gut screamed it was. I stayed there for nearly 2 hours, stomach in knots, waiting for them to come back out. They never did. When I finally drove home, I barely recognized myself in the rearview mirror. My eyes were bloodshot, my jaw clenched so hard it throbbed. I looked like someone who hadn't slept in days. And honestly, I hadn't. The next morning, Rachel acted like nothing had happened. She kissed me goodbye, told me she'd be late again tonight, and drove off. I stood in the kitchen staring at her empty coffee mug, wanting to smash it against the wall. That was the breaking point. The exact moment I realized I couldn't keep pretending. I dug deeper. I searched our joint bank statements, looking for unexplained charges. They were there, clear as day once I stopped ignoring them. Restaurants we'd never been to, boutique hotels out in Bethesda, even a jewelry store in Georgetown. I found credit card charges for Uber rides to neighborhoods she had no reason to be in. It was like someone had pulled back a curtain, revealing a whole other life running parallel to mine. And then came the final straw. On October 5th, a Saturday, Rachel told me she was picking up an extra overnight shift. I nodded, feigning nonchalance, but inside I was already planning. I kissed her goodbye, wished her luck, and then followed her car once again. Sure enough, she drove not to the hospital, but straight to the Marriott. This time, I couldn't just sit in the car. I needed to see it. Needed the pain of proof. I parked 2 blocks away, heart in my throat, and walked toward the hotel. My legs felt like lead, but adrenaline pushed me forward. I lingered in the lobby, pretending to check my phone when I saw them. Rachel and the man. Christopher Hughes. They were standing near the elevators, laughing. She touched his arm in that casual, intimate way she used to touch mine. He leaned down, whispered something, and she smiled. God, that same smile she once reserved for me. And then, as the elevator doors slid open, they stepped inside together. His hand brushed the small of her back. The doors closed. I stood there, rooted to the spot, while a wave of nausea hit me so hard I thought I might collapse. People bustled past, dragging suitcases, chatting into phones, living their normal lives, completely unaware that my entire world had just detonated in front of me. I stumbled outside, gasping for air like I'd been underwater too long. The night was crisp, the harbor lights glittering across the water. But everything looked distorted, unreal, like I was seeing it through broken glass. That was it. No more excuses. No more pretending. My wife wasn't working late. She wasn't stressed from hospital shifts. She was sleeping with another man. The betrayal sank into me like ice water. 10 years together. 5 years married, and all along, she'd been building this secret world behind my back. I drove home in a daze, every song on the radio a cruel joke. Ed Sheeran's Perfect came on, and I almost laughed at the irony before I switched it off. The silence was worse, though just me and my thoughts, replaying the image of her stepping into that elevator with him. When I got home, I sat at the kitchen table until dawn, the city waking up around me. While I stared at the wall and tried to process what I'd seen, I kept thinking about all the times I'd trusted her without question. All the nights I'd rolled over in bed and kissed her goodnight, believing she was mine. She wasn't mine. Not anymore. Maybe not ever by the time she walked in the next morning. Hair damp, eyes tired, mumbling about a long shift. I had already made my decision. I wasn't going to confront her, yet not without a plan. I wasn't going to give her the chance to twist it, to deny it, to make me feel like I was crazy. But deep down, I knew one thing for certain. The life I thought I had was over. And the next step, whatever it was, would change everything. The days after I watched Rachel step into that elevator with Christopher Hughes blurred together in a haze of exhaustion and anger. It's funny how betrayal doesn't hit you all at once. A single blow, it seeps in slowly, poisoning everything it touches. You wake up in the morning, and for a split second, everything feels normal. Then it crashes over you. She's lying. She's cheating. She's not who you thought she was. That realization becomes the first thought of your day and the last before you close your eyes at night. I didn't tell anyone right away. Not my parents, not my closest friend, not even my brother Mark, who I usually went to with everything. I carried it in silence, like some rotten fruit festering in my pocket. Part of me was ashamed. Admitting it out loud would make it real, and there was still some pathetic, desperate piece of me hoping this nightmare could be undone. At work, I went through the motions, but my head wasn't there. My boss, Tom, pulled me aside one afternoon in mid-October, asking if everything was okay. I told him I was just tired, stressed from juggling too many projects. He nodded, told me to hang in there, but I could see the concern in his eyes. My coworkers noticed too. I snapped at people for small mistakes, then immediately regretted it. I'd stare at spreadsheets for hours, unable to process numbers that normally came second nature. Even my body felt different. Food lost its taste. My stomach twisted into knots every time Rachel texted me some casual working late again excuse. Nights were the worst. I'd lie beside her in bed, staring at the ceiling, while she scrolled through her phone, sometimes smiling faintly at whatever she was reading. Was it him? Was he texting her while I lay inches away? The thought made my chest ache. I started drinking more than usual. I'd never been much of a heavy drinker, 1 or 2 beers during a Ravens game, maybe a whiskey on special occasions. But suddenly, I found myself nursing 3-4 glasses of bourbon alone in the kitchen after Rachel went upstairs. The burn dulled the edges of my thoughts, made the silence feel less suffocating. But in the mornings, the hangovers only sharpened the pain. By late October, I couldn't keep the secret anymore. One Saturday, I drove up to Towson to visit my parents. They'd been married 40 years, the kind of couple who still held hands in the grocery store. I sat in their living room, the old clock ticking loudly on the mantel, and blurted it out. "Rachel's cheating on me." The words hung in the air like smoke. My mom gasped, hand flying to her chest. My dad leaned forward, his weathered face tightening. I told them about the hotel bill, about following her, about Christopher Hughes. I left nothing out. My mom cried softly. My dad shook his head, muttering that he always knew Rachel was too slick for her own good. I wanted him to be wrong. Wanted someone to tell me I was mistaken. But there was no denying it now. "Son," my dad said finally, his voice rough, "you don't deserve this. No man does. You've got to decide what comes next. But don't let her make a fool of you any longer," I nodded. But inside I felt small. Weak telling them didn't bring relief. If anything, it made the betrayal heavier, because now it wasn't just mine. My parents carried it too. The following week, I broke down and told Mark. We met at a dive bar in Canton. It's a kind of place with sticky floors and neon Bud Light signs. I hadn't even taken a sip of my beer before I unloaded everything. Mark listened, jaw tight, eyes narrowing. "You need to confront her," he said. "You can't just sit on this. She's walking all over you." I knew he was right, but the thought terrified me. Confrontation meant no turning back. It meant the end of the illusion, the end of us. And despite everything, part of me still loved her. Or maybe I just loved who I thought she was. Meanwhile, Rachel's behavior grew bolder, almost careless. She'd come home later and later, sometimes after 2 in the morning. She had explanations, ready emergency shifts, patient complications. She was grabbing a drink with the girls. She smiled as she said it, kissed me on the cheek, and went upstairs like nothing was wrong. Each lie cut a little deeper. Halloween came and went. I carved a pumpkin alone, half-heartedly handing out candy to neighborhood kids while Rachel claimed she was stuck at work. Watching little princesses and superheroes run down the block with plastic buckets, I couldn't stop thinking that we'd once talked about having our own kids by now. That future felt like a cruel joke. By November, the weight of it all started seeping into every corner of my life. At work, I missed deadlines. I forgot meetings. Tom called me into his office again, concern giving way to frustration. "David, you've got to get it together," he said. "I don't know what's going on, but you can't keep slipping like this." I wanted to tell him, to unload the truth, but how could I? How do you tell your boss that your wife is cheating on you, and it's tearing your life apart? So I nodded, promised to do better, and left his office feeling like a failure. Even my friends noticed. A buddy from my gym asked why I'd stopped showing up. Another texted me after I bailed on poker night for the 3rd time in a row. I gave vague excuses, too busy, too tired. The truth was, I couldn't face anyone. I couldn't stand the thought of pretending to be okay. Thanksgiving was a disaster. Rachel insisted we spend it with her family in Pennsylvania. I didn't want to go, but I didn't have the strength to fight. Her parents greeted us warmly, oblivious. Her sister asked when we were going to start a family, and Rachel laughed, saying someday soon, while shooting me a look I couldn't decipher. I sat there at the dinner table, forcing bites of turkey past the lump in my throat, while the woman I loved lied to everyone around us that night. In her childhood bedroom, with the floral wallpaper, I lay awake listening to her breathe beside me. I thought about the man Christopher Hughes, wondering where he was, if he was thinking about her too. The rage that filled me was white-hot, but beneath it was something worse. Despair. December came, cold and sharp. Holiday lights twinkled across the city, but to me everything looked gray. Rachel decorated our townhouse like she always did, garlands on the banister, stockings hung by the fireplace. She wrapped gifts with bright red bows, humming along to Mariah Carey's "All I Want for Christmas Is You," and I stood there, watching her, wondering how she could betray me so completely and still play the part of a devoted wife. The loneliness was crushing. Even when Rachel was in the same room, I felt utterly alone. I started journaling late at night, scribbling out my thoughts because I couldn't say them aloud. Page after page filled with anger, grief, confusion. Sometimes I wrote letters addressed to her that I never gave her. Other times, I wrote to Christopher, words dripping with venom. My health spiraled too. I dropped 10 pounds without trying, my appetite gone. Sleep was a stranger. I'd lie awake until 3 or 4 in the morning, only to drag myself out of bed at 6 for work. My eyes were constantly bloodshot, my hands shaky from too much caffeine. By mid-December, I reached a breaking point. I was standing in the shower one morning, water pounding against my back, when I realized I couldn't keep living like this. The anger, the secrecy, the pretending, it was killing me. I knew then that confrontation was inevitable. It terrified me, but I also felt a strange calm beneath the fear. Like a prisoner who knows the execution date is set, at least the waiting is over. On December 21st, a Saturday, I made my decision. Rachel said she was working late again, covering a holiday shift. I didn't argue. I kissed her goodbye, told her to stay safe. But as soon as she left, I grabbed my coat and followed. I watched her drive downtown, park near the Marriott, and walk inside. My pulse thundered, but I didn't stop this time. I followed her through the glass doors, keeping my distance, heart pounding so hard it hurt. And there he was, Christopher Hughes, standing in the lobby, waiting for her. He smiled when he saw her, leaned down, kissed her cheek. She laughed, her hand brushing his chest. It was like a knife twisting in my gut. I didn't confront them, not yet. I wasn't ready. But I knew the time was coming. The dam was about to break. That night, back home, sat at the kitchen table long after she'd gone to bed, the clock ticking past midnight. I thought about the past year, about every lie, every betrayal. My life had become unrecognizable. I couldn't let it continue. The fallout wasn't just inside me anymore. It was everywhere. In my work, in my friendships, in my family, in my health, and now I knew it was only a matter of time before the truth exploded out into the open. By the time December rolled into the last week before Christmas, I felt like someone had drained me of everything that had once made life bearable. But amid the exhaustion, the anger, the ache in my chest, something new started to grow with clarity I hadn't felt in months. This wasn't about pretending anymore, or sitting in silent misery. This was about taking control of a life that had been hijacked. It's about reclaiming something I had thought was mine. I started small. The first step was gathering evidence. I knew that what I had, hotel receipts, credit card charges, was damning, but I needed more. I wasn't planning a dramatic confrontation yet. I needed facts, details that could not be denied or spun. I spent hours combing through our bank statements, cross-referencing dates with the Marriott charges. I pulled emails, flight itineraries, Uber receipts. I printed them out, carefully stacking them into folders in the corner of the bedroom closet. Behind the extra blankets where she would never think to look, it felt almost surgical. Methodically, I was assembling a case against someone who had invaded every corner of my life. The process was exhausting, but oddly empowering. Each little discovery was a spark, reminding me that I wasn't helpless. I wasn't blind. I wasn't a fool. Then came the hardest part, facing my own emotions. I realized I had spent so long in denial, in self-recrimination, that I had almost forgotten who I was outside of this relationship. The person I had been before, all of this confident, steady, dependable, was still inside me. I started jogging again, running along the inner harbor before sunrise, the cold air biting my lungs, the city still asleep. The rhythm of my feet hitting the pavement reminded me that I could endure, that I could survive, and in those early morning runs I planned. Not revenge, at first, though part of me craved it, raw and fierce. No, I planned for truth, for exposure, for reclaiming my dignity. I wanted her to understand the gravity of what she had done. I wanted the world she had been hiding in, the lies, the secrecy, to be visible. It didn't take long to act. One evening I stayed home from work under the pretense of a migraine. Rachel came in around 11 p.m., claiming her shift had ended early. I watched her from the doorway of the living room, phone in hand. When she passed the closet where I'd hidden the folders, I didn't say a word. I waited until she was in the bedroom before retrieving the evidence I'd collected: the receipts, the emails, the hotel bills, even a few photos I had managed to snap from outside the Marriott's lobby without being seen. The next morning, I made my first move. I sent an email to her work, not her direct colleagues, not her supervisors, but the HR department at Johns Hopkins. I attached copies of her hotel bills with Christopher Hughes, noting the discrepancy in her claimed shifts. I didn't write accusations. I wrote facts. Concrete, undeniable facts. The reaction was immediate. Rachel's phone started blowing up with calls from HR and colleagues. Her usually calm voice suddenly flustered, panicked. I sat at the kitchen table, watching from a distance, feeling a mixture of vindication and guilt. I wasn't cruel, not really. I just wanted her to face the consequences of the life she had been leading behind my back, and face them she did. Within a week, HR had scheduled multiple meetings, questioning her about shifts, hospital logs, and travel claims. She came home one night, quiet, withdrawn, pretending to read a book while I watched, trying to gauge whether she knew I had done it. I didn't confront her. I didn't need to. The truth was catching up with her. But I didn't stop there. Part of me still ached to make Christopher Hughes real, to hold him accountable in some way. So I did some digging, carefully, legally. Public records, LinkedIn profiles, social media accounts. It wasn't hard. He was a wealthy consultant, always posting photos of business trips, fancy dinners, and smiles that didn't include her. I printed out everything I could find, adding it to my growing folders of evidence. I also started to reach out to people in Rachel's life, the friends I knew she confided in, quietly asking questions about late nights, sudden trips, stories that didn't match up. I didn't lie or exaggerate. I just let the truth surface in tiny, undeniable ways. Meanwhile, I had to keep myself grounded. The rage could have consumed me entirely if I let it. I started writing letters I never intended to send, jotting down everything I felt. Anger, betrayal, grief, even love. Some nights, I would tear them up and throw the pieces in the trash, feeling lighter with each shredded page. It was therapy, self-administered, messy, necessary. As December turned into early January 2020, I realized the transformation wasn't just about exposing Rachel. It was about me reclaiming myself. I had been passive, trusting, maybe too naive, but I was no longer a victim. I was awake. I was alert. And I was preparing for the confrontation that would finally make this real. Then came the day it all came to a head. January 10th. I'd spent the entire morning going over every piece of evidence, making sure everything was bulletproof, organized. By late afternoon, Rachel came home early, claiming a day off. She was tired as usual, but there was a smugness in her smile, an assumption that everything was under her control. I led her to the living room, careful to remain calm, measured. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply pulled out the folders, spread them across the coffee table, and left them there. Her eyes widened as she registered the contents, the hotel bills, the photos, the emails, the financial records. For the first time in months, the woman I had loved was speechless. She looked at me, a flash of panic crossing her features. Davy, I held up a hand. No, just look. Take it in. Her lips trembled, and for a moment I saw something I hadn't expected. Fear. Not of me, but of exposure. The controlled, confident persona she had worn for months was cracking. It was beautiful in a cold, vindictive way. That night, we didn't fight. We didn't scream. She sat in silence while I watched her, recording nothing, threatening nothing, just letting her confront the consequences of her own choices. It was the first night in months I felt some semblance of power return. Over the next few days, Rachel tried to explain, to plead, to rationalize. Every story she offered was another layer of deception, but I barely listened. My mind wasn't on her excuses anymore, was on the life I wanted moving forward. Slowly, painfully, I began imagining a future without her, without the lies, without the betrayal. I also made peace with one thing I had been avoiding, letting go of the idea of revenge. The meticulous tracking, the exposure, it wasn't about hurting her anymore. It was about reclaiming myself, about taking back the hours, days, and months she had stolen from me with her lies. Christopher Hughes would remain a ghost, irrelevant now. because the real battle had never been with him, it had been within me. By mid-January, I'd started rebuilding routines I'd abandoned. I returned to the gym regularly, started journaling every night, and even signed up for a weekend writing workshop. The small victories, the physical stamina I regained, the clarity in my mind, the sense that I was no longer drowning in someone else's deceit, were intoxicating. Rachel, meanwhile, began to crumble. HR had her on administrative leave pending an investigation, and the truth was spilling out to friends and colleagues alike. I never gloated. I didn't need to. Observing her facade unravel was enough. She had underestimated the quiet strength I had buried beneath the hurt, depression, the rage. It's strange how betrayal teaches you resilience. I had thought I would break, thought I would lose myself in the despair. But instead I discovered that I could endure, that I could act with purpose, even when my heart felt like shattered glass. I learned that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it quietly gathers itself in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to emerge. By late January, I was no longer the man who had found the hotel bill in September. I was different. Hardened, yes, but also clearer, wiser, and strangely lighter. The tension, the fear, the uncertainty, they had all been stripped away. What remained was a version of myself I could trust, and that, I realized, was the most important victory of all. February 2020 arrived with that sharp winter air that bites at your nose and makes your lungs ache if you stay outside too long. The city still glittered with leftover holiday lights, and snow had dusted the sidewalks like powdered sugar. It should have felt like a season of renewal, a chance for fresh beginnings. But for me, it was the start of reckoning. The week since the confrontation with Rachel had been tense but oddly calm. She kept to herself, huddled in her own shame and worry. While I slowly rebuilt the fragments of my life that she had shattered, the investigation at her work dragged on, slow, meticulous unraveling of her lies. HR pulled records, confirmed schedules, spoke to colleagues, and eventually determined that she had indeed fabricated shifts. And yes, the trips to the Marriott and elsewhere were personal, not work-related. I watched all of this from a distance, feeling a quiet vindication. There was no joy in it, no dancing in the streets, just the sober satisfaction that the truth was finally out. That the web of deceit she had spun was exposed to the light. I had taken to walking around the city in the evenings, letting the wind whip through my hair, letting the sound of traffic and distant train whistles fill the spaces that had been heavy with silence. I'd passed by the inner harbor, where once I had stalked her footsteps in anguish. Now I felt a strange sense of ownership, not of her, but of myself. I had survived. I had endured. I had reclaimed the man who had been buried under months of lies and heartbreak. By mid-February, Rachel had begun to pack her things. She didn't fight anymore, didn't argue or beg for understanding. I think she realized that the bridge between us had burned beyond repair. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee one morning. She carefully boxed up her belongings, clothes, personal items, little mementos from trips she had taken without me. Her hands shook slightly as she handled each item. There was a mixture of shame, regret, and something else, perhaps disbelief that she had underestimated me so thoroughly. I didn't feel triumphant, not really. It wasn't about that, I felt. Resolved. The final day she left is etched into my memory. The sky was overcast, the kind of gray that seems heavy enough to press down on your chest. She came to me one last time, suitcase in hand, and I could see the fatigue, the remorse, the defeat in her eyes. She opened her mouth, started to say something, but I didn't need to hear it. I already knew everything I needed to know. Instead, I nodded, my own throat tight but steady. Goodbye, Rachel, and she left. The silence that followed was profound. Our townhouse, once filled with the hum of routines, the faint laughter of shared jokes, the scent of coffee and her perfume lingering in the air, was empty. I wandered through the rooms like a ghost of myself, touching things that had once been hers, now abandoned. And yet, amidst the emptiness, I felt a strange peace. A weight had been lifted. I spent the following days slowly reclaiming my home. I painted over the faint smudges on the walls where photos had once hung. I rearranged furniture, cleared closets, and even sold a few pieces we had bought together. Each small act felt symbolic, like staking claim to my own life again. I began cooking meals I enjoyed, listening to music I loved, and allowing myself to finally laugh without the nagging shadow of betrayal hanging over me. Friends noticed the change. Mark came by one evening, and we cracked open beers while watching an Orioles game. "You look lighter," he said, eyes crinkling with a mixture of concern and relief. I nodded, letting the words settle. He didn't need to know the full extent of my strategies, the late-night investigations, the careful planning. He just needed to see that I was moving forward. I also started dating again. Slowly, cautiously, like stepping into a cold pool. It wasn't about replacing Rachel, wasn't about proving anything to her. It was about rediscovering intimacy, trust, and the simple joy of human connection. My first coffee date with someone new, a woman named Laura I met through a mutual friend, felt surreal. I laughed at her jokes, noticed the way sunlight caught her hair, and for the first time in months, didn't have a panic in my chest. I realized that life could be simple again, even after everything that had happened. One of the most unexpected things. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't about letting Rachel off the hook. It wasn't about erasing her actions or pretending they didn't happen. It was about freeing myself from the endless spiral of rage and despair. Sitting on the roof deck one evening, watching the harbor lights reflect on the water, I allowed myself to finally let go of the hatred that had been my constant companion. And yet the scars remained. Trust, once broken, is not easily mended. Even now I find myself cautious, wary, measuring the intentions of those I let into my life. But that caution is different. Now it's not born of fear or insecurity. It's born of experience, wisdom forged in the fire of betrayal. By March, Rachel's departure was finalized. We had a brief meeting to sign divorce papers, formalities stripped of emotion because the real emotional work had already been done. I left the courthouse with a strange mixture of relief and sadness, aware that a chapter of my life had ended, but also grateful that I had survived it intact. In the months that followed, I embraced my own life with a ferocity I hadn't realized I possessed. I traveled to places I had always wanted to see, revisited old hobbies, and even started writing about my experiences, not publicly at first, just in a journal. The act of writing became therapeutic, allowing me to process the complex tangle of betrayal, grief, and ultimately recovery. I won't lie and say it was easy. There were nights when I lay awake, haunted by memories of Rachel's smile, the ease with which she had lied, the tiny moments of intimacy that had been poisoned by deceit. But I learned to sit with those memories without letting them define me. They were part of my story, yes, but they were not the totality of it. By the summer of 2020, I had fully reestablished my routines, my social circles, and my sense of self. The city that had once seemed suffocating now felt like home again. I attended concerts, visited museums, and even started volunteering at a local shelter, helping dogs that reminded me of resilience in the face of hardship. And somewhere along the way, I realized that I had grown, not in spite of what happened, but because of it. Betrayal had stripped me down, exposed every vulnerability, and forced me to confront truths I had ignored. It was painful, yes, devastating at times. But it also revealed strengths I didn't know I had. I think about Rachel occasionally, not with rage, not with longing, but with a detached clarity of someone who has survived a storm. I understand now that she was never the person I thought she was, and that the life we shared was built on illusions. That understanding doesn't erase the pain, but it allows me to move forward without carrying it as a burden. Looking back now, standing on the roof deck one late August evening, watching the sun set over Baltimore, I can almost feel the weight lift from my shoulders entirely. The harbor glimmers orange and gold, boats cutting through the water, gulls circling overhead, and for the first time in a long time, I feel truly, completely free. Freedom, I've learned, isn't about revenge. It isn't about proving someone wrong or winning some moral battle. Freedom is about reclaiming yourself, piece by piece, until the life you thought you lost feels whole again. And as I sit there, sipping my coffee and letting the cool breeze wash over me, I know one thing for certain. Betrayal may have tried to break me, but it didn't. I am still here, stronger, wiser, and more aware of my own worth than I ever was before. The story of Rachel and Christopher Hughes is part of my past now. A painful, unforgettable part, yes, but no longer the defining chapter of my life. I have rewritten my ending, and it's one I can live with, one I can be proud of. I've survived betrayal, heartbreak, and lies. And in doing so, I've discovered something extraordinary: resilience, dignity, and the quiet, unwavering power of reclaiming your own life. The hotel bill in her purse started as a symbol of everything I had lost, but in the end, it became the spark that ignited my awakening. It reminded me that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to rise, to confront the truth, and to walk forward into the light. And that, above all, is the lesson I carry with me now.